Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's BAInsights session. Today, we're talking about functional architecture and functional design. And I'm pleased once again to have a couple of really good guests with us to talk about that very topic. Now, before I do, if any of you are watching this today, BAInsights session, and you haven't subscribed, please do, because it does make a difference. If you like the video, please drop a like, because I think that helps spread the word of these sessions. And as importantly, if you've got any comments to make, anything you want to share or questions you want to ask, please feel free to make a comment. We're really pleased to see what you've got to say. Let's go into some introductions then. Let's start with Hari.
All right. Thanks for having me here, John, and nice to meet you, Paromita. Let me introduce myself as Hari Prasad Josyula. You can call me Hari. I work for an organization called Dow Jones. Some of you, if you're from the North America, you must have heard the Dow Jones Industrial Average. So that's one of the lines of businesses that I support as a product owner in my organization, in addition to several other lines of businesses that I support. And coming to my background, I've been working in the consulting industry for about 16 plus years now. Started my career as a BA, and still a BA, but as the name goes and as the industry goes, right, I wear multiple hats depending on the project I work in. Scrum Master, Product Owner, Business Analyst, Functional Analyst, you name it, right? I mean, that's what we all do, right? We are jack of all trades, I guess. And yeah, I worked for several clients in my consulting career, including, Royal Bank of Canada, US Bank, Ameriprise Financial, JP Morgan, Northern Trust, so on and so forth, and currently based out of New Jersey. That's where I go to office, and my current organization headquartered in Manhattan, New York. Thanks for having me again.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Sharon. And Paromita.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Paromita Majumder. I work as a principal consultant with Genpact currently. So a little bit about me. I have been working as a BA for almost over 15 years now. So I was mainly working in banking and financial services until almost around 6 months back. I started stretching my capabilities a bit into life sciences now. So working for a global veterinary company to roll out, or rather create a business case for them for their payments platform integration. And yeah, great to be back again, John. Thank you very much for organizing this, and nice to meet you, Hari.
Thank you very much. Brilliant. All right. Well, definitely got two of the right people to talk about functional architecture and design. That's for sure. So let's start with the first question, really, and I'll put this to you first, Hari. In terms of what is functional architecture and design, and how do you describe the role of business analyst in shaping this?
Well, I hope you don't score me on that, right? I will try my version of what I think and my perspective on this, John.
That's it. Every question's a simple one, Hari, of course, and no answers are wrong.
All right. In my perspective, well, recently we built a home, so right, those memories are still fresh, and me coming from a business analyst background and constructing a house, right? I think I can really make a lot of similarities in those processes, right? Like when I'm building a house, right, I got to specify what I need, right? What I want to do with this particular room or particular floor. And so when you ask me, right, functional architecture and all, I believe it is the function, right? The what before how is what I think comes to my mind, and then right, and one of the mega projects I worked on, right, for some of these financial services companies, and I'm sure Paromita can appreciate that as well, is small, medium, big projects, right? Any of these projects, right? When you are building, a project or working on, brainstorming a user journey, you definitely want to envision what the business wants, right? So in my opinion, I think the functional architecture is all about the what rather than how. So,
yeah, that's good. Yeah, excellent start, Harry. And Paramita?
Yeah, so if I go by the textbook definition, of course, we see that it's a functional architecture basically defines the various functions and some sub-functions that exist within a system. So if I go by that and what Hari mentioned in terms of the building blocks, it's the different building blocks of a system. Now, how we as BAs are part of it or involved in deriving that is each of those functional blocks or aspects are derived from the functional requirements that we as BAs capture. So there is a there is a link between the two, right? So based on the functional requirements we have captured, they will be translated in a way to those functional blocks. So that's my definition of it.
Okay, and I guess I have my view on functional requirements, functional architecture rather, is really just this is that bridge between the requirements, which are purely focused on the need and the aspirations of the business, and the solutions that get built by technology. And I think Harry's example of a house is an excellent one, because I think before we go and build a house, as an example, we don't just start with, right, I want to go and buy this particular brand of air conditioning. I want this particular brand of kitchen. I want to use a certain technology as part of my wiring. We don't really think like that, right? First and foremost, we say, right, I need a house, and I need it to have 3 bedrooms, and I need that house to have a garden, and I need that house to be accessible. I need that house to be wherever it's located, and I build up a series of requirements, and that allows me to visualize what that house has to have. So I deliberately picked on accessible there for a moment. So if I pick on a house that needs to be accessible, maybe that means it shouldn't be on the 20th floor of a block of flats. Maybe I need it to be a bungalow, so it is really accessible for me. And yes, it has 3 bedrooms. I understand what the purpose of those rooms are, but maybe there's a bit more to it. Where should this house be situated? Should it be built out of bricks, or should it be built out of wood? And why is that? Well, actually, maybe I don't necessarily go in to describe that it should be built out of bricks and wood, but I need to describe that maybe if it's in we don't get much of these in the UK, but if it's in a hurricane area, then actually it needs to be able to sustain a hurricane and not blow over. It needs to have ramps on it so I can get myself into the building potentially. It has to have the 3 buildings, and it has to have various other things that I've basically asked for. And my functional design is really that picture. So I guess bring it back to more typical sense that I'm used to working with. From looking at the requirements that I've received from my stakeholders, I can start to appreciate that based on what I'm seeing from my stakeholders and articulated, that we need to bring together a system or systems that allow us to capture data, store data, to report on the data, to maybe have some workflow, to maybe have some user permissions to restrict others getting unauthorized access. And I'm starting to draw that picture of those functional components of that system or solution, as you both put it. So that's the way that I think about the functional design. And I think for me, when I've got that picture, then all those independent parts, whether they're functions of a system, whether they're interfaces, whether they're separate systems that build up the overall solution, that's a really good time then to go away and explore those in more detail. That's sort of how I would think about it. I wonder, is there any way, and I'll start with you, Paramita, on this one. When you're thinking about and you're building your functional design, are there any particular stakeholders that you tend to engage with, and what's the purpose of doing so?
I think to start with, sorry.
I'll start with Paramita first on this one.
Yeah, I guess to start with, always go to your sponsor or product manager and understand the vision or the roadmap. First, start there. I mean, that's what I have found is really helpful in not to, build up something which is, or try to propose a design that is not something that everybody wants or what we need in the market. So start there, and then go down to the users next to understand what do you need in the system, right, to perform the work that you need to do. What can we add more to make it better, or what do you think if we add that can basically identifying the edge cases that if we add something else, it might make things worse for you. And then I think very key, and I've seen very few organizations do this. Well, get the engineering team on board as early on as part of the design phase, because while you are having this communication with your sponsors or product managers and the users, it's always good to have that communication with the engineering team and say, hey, can we do this? Can, if we want to build UI which takes us to this site first and then comes back to our own system and all this, is that possible? What about the performance and all of, so have that conversation so that you do not end up having trouble at the end or when you're supposed to start with the work. Rather, at upfront during your design phase itself in terms of what is feasible, not feasible. So I guess from what I have always done is I've always engaged with my users to ensure that I understand what they need from a design perspective, what will help them with the system proposition, and then parallelly work out with the developers. These are two very key areas I've always kind of tried to collaborate during the design phase.
Yeah, I would agree. Well, I'll hand over to Hari to share his view.
Yeah. When we come to the stakeholders, at least in the last few years, especially, right, the organizations are maturing and they're leaning more towards fast-paced or want to build products faster, more efficient and quicker, and all of those. So I would say, right, the traditional waterfall methodology for your application lifecycle management or your SDLC, right? I think it still holds good, and all the stakeholders have equal weightage. I believe in having a collaborative way of building anything, right? A product, a project, right? A functionality within an existing system or application. So I believe in that all the stakeholders have equal weightage in getting the requirements to the business needs. So whether be it's development team, the testing team, or the QA team, the UI UX, the business users, the SMEs, all of these have equal and very crucial role. And when we build collaboratively in an iterative fashion, I think that will definitely lead to building a product that not only satisfies the business needs, right? It will definitely evolve, right, and eventually will cater to the fast followers and the project needs, right, in a more efficient way. Recently, right, in the last couple of years with the Gen AI and the whole buzz around the artificial intelligence, I was part of this AI task force, I would say, one of the key, very visible projects. And within this, right, we have come up with this concept of, I would say the old wine in a new bottle, right? So they're building parts and all, wherein, right, the key components of a project team are co-located, right? When I say co-located, right, it's not like physically located, right? We all are in a pod working together collaboratively, and this task force, right, they are delivering results and the deliverables in 5 days, right? Not even 2 weeks or 3 weeks for a sprint, right? 5 days or less, right? That is how the task force have evolved into.
Yeah, and I mean, you definitely both made some really, really interesting points there around the different types of stakeholders, and particularly, Hari, when you were talking about the need to collaborate with all those stakeholders, and as you put it, you want to treat them equally, you want to give every one of them their own voice and an opportunity to contribute. And I think functional design is quite a good opportunity to do that, because I think quite often, there are requirements, at different levels, whether you're using a fully waterfall business requirements document, or whether you're using high level requirements that might come out of the early sessions on an agile project. There are requirements that evolve, but it's important to start building that picture to try and understand what it is we're actually building and what we're going to bring together, so that then you can use the skills and the expertise and the insight from different individuals to ensure that your picture is actually representative of what you want to build and what you should be building, and representative of something that's going to satisfy the need of your customers. And I won't replay all of the names that you mentioned there, but I mean, just talking about, I think the test team as an example, giving them the context of what we should be expecting to build. Maybe that can help them think about the type of tests that they might need to plan for. And the UI team, recognizing that there's some of the components, they're going to have visual user interfaces that they need to plan, but also recognizing that it's not just about screens. There's information that's going to interact with other components that are being built, or data that's coming from other interfaces. How do they start to consider that as part of their design? And I think as well, added on top of what you said, is somewhat related actually to when Paromita said about the users, bringing the users, bringing the business stakeholders together, and feeding back with them this picture of what you've drawn, which really shows that based on the requirements that the users and the business have given you, you've now been able to portray a very simple high-level picture that says, our solution is going to comprise of a workflow and data and a reporting, as an example, and give them the opportunity, before we start worrying about the technology or the specific details of those requirements, does that, at a fundamental level, is it aligned to what they need? Do they fundamentally want to manage the workflow and the data and transition what they're working on through the life cycle? Do they want to be able to present any information and report on it, to govern it, or control it, or to monitor it? And is this information coming from somewhere, or are they actually keying it in already? To take a couple of examples. And I think that functional design helps you sort of play back what you've understood to be the requirements and how it could be satisfied as the solution. And then it gives you that benefit, as Paromita started talking about, when you're engaging with the engineers and the development team, so that they can have a picture in their mind of what you're imagining and the business are imagining is going to be part of the solution, so that they can go away and decide, well, actually, based on that, have we got to go and utilize an existing component we've already built elsewhere in the organization, or do we have to go and build a Oracle database or a Java front end, or whatever it might be? So for them to decide how they do it, but now we've given them the picture of what it is that they're expecting to put together. So I feel, for me, it's a really powerful approach to really glue a lot of things together between the need and the solution. I'm sorry to.
I think one more thing to add, and just because I've found it quite useful and helpful. I know we talked about users who use the system, engineering team, and others, but there are some organizations, like I've worked with a couple, who have got really proactive marketing insights team, right? So when you are starting to design a system, it's always good that if you have individuals or teams who does all the market research, survey, and all of that, try to involve them at that stage and understand, is your product what are the things that your product needs to have to ensure that it is at par with the current market standard, what people are looking for. Like there are like login screens, a lot of people like, oh, what is in there, just a username, password. People have moved on from that. There are like simpler ways. It's like they just want that you just open a site and bam, it opens up the page they want. So having them involved as well, like, is quite key. It's not just the users who use them, rather there are some these other teams, supporting teams, who can prove to be really, really beneficial while you are starting with, while you are designing the system or into that functional design phase, to ensure that you have the right level of design.
Yeah, I think it's a really excellent point there, Paramita, because it shows that some of the audience that you'll be sharing your view of the functional design with or the functional architecture with, they will have different lenses or that they will look at this through. So some of them are not trying to build every component. Some are only focused on maybe the security side, or some are focused on the user experience side. But at least you're giving them that picture to start appreciating what it is they need to go away and work on, but gives them the context in which that element fits. And I think it's particularly important for the BA team as well, because if you've been asked to work on an interface or work on a small part of the system, if you give those BAs a view of what else has been built as part of the system and what other interfaces are existed, it does give you that bigger picture for you to be able to understand the part your component plays in the overall solution as well. Maybe it also encourages a bit more of that collaboration, going back to the point that Harry made. And I wonder, I mean, we've touched on it a little bit, but maybe not in a huge amount of detail. I wonder, Harry, how do you ensure that business requirements are actually are accurately translated into functional design? And when I say business requirements, it could be the traditional type or high-level stories, of course.
Yeah, it's a good segue into the next topic, right? So one thing that I found really successful and the lot of stakeholders really like is having a session where there are no judgments, right? Like when you have several people, right? Say more than 3-4 people, right? You get all these prejudices and biases in the minds, right? So when you have any of these kind of sessions with these stakeholders, having a judgment-free environment will definitely go a long way in getting these, either the requirements or the user stories, whatever it is, right, in a proper way, well articulated, which everyone can understand, right? Whether be it's a technical developer, a business SME, a tester, a production support, right? Whoever it is. So that's one. Second thing, what I usually try to use most frequently is what does a day in the life of, or an hour in the life of, or a week in the life of a XYZ person or a role, right? When I'm working with, say, an FP&A user, right, who is, on a weekly basis, on a bi-weekly basis, monthly basis, generates several reports, right? What does a day of a FP&A manager look like, right? What are all the various things that they do, right? Let them just go free flow, right? And when we capture that, I think that will definitely give us the proper groundwork to ensure that whatever the requirements we have, at the beginning of the project, middle of the project, end of the project, right, to compare and contrast to see if we are meeting the business needs or not. And then maybe, right, as a BA, one thing that I do, when I'm not in an active meeting with the stakeholders is create persona journeys, right? Okay, I'm working with an FP&A manager or a power user who's building, Power BI reports or a Tableau report, or I'm just a risk manager trying to see geopolitical risks, right? How do I prepare for the next wave of attacks on so and so country, and right, all these things go in the mind, right? So when I do this, I think these all become the building blocks towards a robust functional architecture. And I think these are some of the techniques, right, that I use in a practical day-to-day life to ensure the requirements and the discussions that happen around the architecture, right? Of course, the technical architect, the technology tech lead, right, whoever it is in the project, right? Of course, they bring the expertise in terms of the technology stack, the right tools and applications that are needed. But these functional building blocks will ensure that we are catering to the business need.
Yeah, absolutely. Paramit?
What I've really found useful is, of course, most of the organizations are now working in an agile setup or a agile setup, I must say. So for the past at least 5 years, we have wherever I've worked, we have started running like 3 amigo sessions where BA, solution architect, and someone from engineering, like a developer and a testing team, will be part of those conversations. So as we are refining the designs, working on the designs, when it is at a place where it's presentable, I always try to get the user into one of those meetings and go through what we have worked on to just see, does it look nice? Does it look like this is what you want? Or do you think there is some problem? Because that early as you can get those feedback, it's better and leads to better functional design rather than leaving it till it's developed and then you go into the show and tell phase and there you find issues. Because as much as we say, right, when something comes up in show and tell, it means, oh, another user story, and immediately that starts a panic. Oh, this might mean that the release will get delayed, right? So it's better to get that early view and early sign off rather than waiting till the end. Also, I know it's not a practice in a lot of organizations, but in some organizations, I've seen that as you develop, as you do the functional designing, while the test team is involved, right, they start thinking of test scenarios, test cases. And what I have tried is always sit with them, review those as early as possible, because when considering they have worked in various projects, they take on inputs from all those projects and then write down those test scenarios. So when you go through that, and it might suddenly come to your mind, oh, I haven't really thought of this scenario. This will not work, the flow that I'm designing, or it might need another field on the screen, or the data model that I have suggested might not work. So so it's better to have that view as well, or at least start telling them, why don't you just start estimating or see how many test cases may be required at a very high level. Just put some initial test cases to just say, we will test this screen, we think there will be 18 data combinations or 20 data combinations, whatever be it. So these are at least a couple of things I have found quite helpful to translate that to ensure that business requirements are accurately translated into functional designs.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, really good points you both made there in terms of like different perspectives, as you're saying there, Paromita, that you talk to different individuals, developers, business testers, users, for example, and then overlaying that with what Hari was saying about when you're engaging with them and having that judgment-free zone, so they're sort of encouraged to really share their opinions. I think it's a really good opportunity to really, for you to play back what you've imagined to be, not imagined, you've learned from their from their requirements. You've taken a view of what the functional design might be. But the reason we reviewed it with some of the groups that we just spoke about is not so that we can tell them that the functional design we've come up with is accurate, is actually to prove that it is. And that means sometimes it isn't, because sometimes some of our users haven't come up with all the requirements that they could think of. But sometimes by looking at the functional design that we've pictured, it might encourage them to think, actually, there's a few things missing there. There's things I would have expected. So they can raise that. It's a good opportunity to raise it. And therefore, you want that judgment-free, that really open environment to be able to encourage it to come from different stakeholders and different perspectives. But then you want them to be comfortable that once you've taken that additional bit of feedback from them, i.e. that something was missing, that you're now building that relationship to say, okay, well, let's now articulate a requirement that justifies having that part of the design. And when it is, I'm more than happy to have it as part of the functional design, so we can prove traceability between what it is you've asked for, our solution design or our functional design, and then ultimately to promote that traceability. So when something's built, we can prove that the thing that's been built is actually what we need as well. So I quite like the points you made about the different perspectives and in that judgment-free area. I mean, I think for me, what you both said sort of really builds on, I guess, an area that I naturally think about in terms of validating that coverage of requirements to the functional architecture. And it really is, once I've read through the requirements, and I've drawn what I believe to be the architecture, to then, from a traceability standpoint, to be able to say, do I know and can I prove what every one of my uniquely identified components are and how they are justifiable because they relate to a requirement. And if that's the case, then good, I know I'm comfortable and I've not made something up. But then the flip side is actually, are there now things that are missing that, based on my experience or based on the input of the technical architect, for example, that we feel that we would expect to see as part of this solution? Because we all bring experience, of course. And I guess, Harry, basically for Dow, you probably know that there's probably things you would expect to see, and if they ask some inquiries and they're not including some of the things that you might ordinarily have seen in other conversations, doesn't mean it is missing, but probably it means that you'll bring it up as a conversation point to say, do you need this as well? I think that, and this technique helps paint that picture that you can play back and then take that feedback. I wonder, Paromita, what techniques do you use actually to communicate the functional architecture or its concepts, particularly to non-technical stakeholders who might not have seen the concept before?
Really good question, Don, I must say, because a challenge we face quite often, isn't it, to ensure that whomever you're presenting a functional design is not bored by all the technicalities. Having usable UIs is very helpful. There are a lot of tools, and we might talk about it at some point, but always having that usable, workable UI and showing how many clicks and what will be the flow of the system always helps someone who doesn't want to get into the technicalities. Another thing that I have worked, when I was working for IBM, we tried to, for our clients initially, we tried to create feature packs, and it kind of included information technical information at a very high level. It would just say, like, just at the level of UI, middle layer, and backend, and will just show a couple of boxes so that anybody can understand, like, you have a front end, how many services are there connecting to your database, and just to show the flow. Anybody can understand that. But it also gives you the view of how much work that means, because for every function, if you're defining that and showing one service to get the personal information, one service to get, say, your account information and so on. So you, as someone who, say, for instance, sponsor who doesn't want to know the technicalities, but at least know, okay, the team will need to develop 10 APIs. So that's a lot of work. It will take them few months. So that's what helps. So yeah, I think having usable UIs and having, of course, where I mentioned feature path, which is very specific to an organization, but something I think we all create to communicate to our non-technical users, always helps to have those information at a high level.
Yeah, it does show that whilst there is the level of functional design, sometimes there's also the features that you're going to have within a component, and that can bring it to life a little bit more for the users who might not know the concepts, they might not know what a functional design is, they might not even really know what a user story is, but they know what they need, and they can understand what you're playing back to them. So therefore, it's starting to make a little bit of sense. And I think, going back to what Harry said a little while ago, maybe it resonates with their day in their life, and then you're talking to them in that language, and you're talking to them about solutions that are going to help them work their way through their day. I think will really resonate. So I think it's a really good answer to that question there, Paromita, that you gave. Thank you. And Harry, what would be your perspective on techniques that you use to communicate functional architecture?
Yeah, those are all really valid techniques, and tested over time and has been accepted across the industry. When I started my career, I had a really good mentor who I really really appreciate even till date, right? So those words still, right, echo in my mind, right? So the first thing he mentioned, and that I still remember today, right, when I meet with my either a senior level, right, executive level, C-suite level people, or if I'm working with, just our regular project team who I interact on a daily basis, it doesn't matter, right? If you keep the things simple, right, at the ground level, have the visualization, right, of whatever you're doing, right, whether it's building a workflow or building a complex tool to analyze, several risk factors for a portfolio, right, a $5 billion portfolio versus, or you're just building a login screen, right? A simple login screen, which we all know, right, as a BA, right? Which it will have user ID and password, right? A simple login flow versus, a complex project. But if you keep things simple and if you have your visuals well, right? If you have a functional prototype that you can present, and if you can use some analogs, right, or something like a metaphor, right? Say everyone knows how to drive a car, right? So when you're building a project, right, if you can correlate, hey, we are building this project because we want to go from point A to point B, right? We don't talk about, hey, is it an internal combustion engine? It uses gasoline of this type, and we don't need to talk about all of that, from the get-go, right? We need to explain really well with the prototypes or some kind of a visual. It can be a simple process flow diagram you create in a PowerPoint template, right? And if you can show that to a technical person, a business user, I'm sure, right, they can correlate really well, right? Whether, it's really resembles what they are looking for, right? Whether it's what they have in their mind, right? I think these are all some of the techniques that I have used, and I believe that really work well in a project setup, right? Whether it's an informal or a formal setup.
Yeah, I think you're right about keeping it simple, because I think most of the audience that will review your functional architecture or your functional designs are not BAs, they're not expert technologists, they're just users of these solutions, and they're people that have a different day job than we do. So trying to keep it simple means that you're improving the chances of that being understood, and that people can then provide you some useful feedback. I guess the worst scenario is to provide something that looks so complicated that certain users feel almost like they're not able to share the feedback. They feel uncomfortable because they may not understand the technicality of it. Whereas actually that's the opposite of what we need. So keeping it simple, I think, really resonates with me. I mean, that's why I tend to use, functional integration models, which are really just boxes to note functions and lines between them to show the integration and interfaces. I think that generally is you probably can't get much more simple than that, as far as functional design, but that's pretty effective. I think sometimes I've also used UML component diagrams as well, because they generally do the same thing, albeit in a slightly more formal sense. But I quite like the way on a component design diagram with the interface object. It always looks like a catcher's mitt and a ball is always the way I describe it. It's quite a neat way of showing inward and outbound interfaces if you need those. But again, I try not to go too heavy on the UML because we want people to understand it. But that's probably all I'd add on top of the point you both very well made. Speaking of which, talking about points made, I think Paromita, you spoke about tooling a little while ago, I think, if I recall, and I think it'd be good to know from you. Are there any tools or templates actually that you might recommend for functional design?
I have used a couple of tools before, which helped me a lot during the functional design phase, specifically from a UI perspective. Whilst most of the organizations have, UI, UX team, but I've used a tool called Axure. So you can create UIs, workable UIs. The good thing, what I have not found in other UI tools like Figma and others, is that you have the option to add annotation, have the option to add labels, to the extent of you can also mention like, from which field the data on that particular, like which table the data will be exported from, or to the extent of what service it might use. Now, why I say that's helpful is might not be for all the users, but at least when I think of the engineering team, when they look at just the UI, they know very easily and immediately, like on the UI, where the data is coming from or where the data will be sent. One. Similarly, even for BAs to an extent, and solution architects and other, say some issue comes up, and you don't have to then scan through multiple design documents to understand which service exactly is getting this data or which table this data is coming from. You have that on that document. So I have found that really, really useful. Also, I've recently used Lucid Chart as well as Miro. I think having the customer journeys mapped there, which definitely we start with as we start with our functional design, is really easy, simple, and I mean, the look and feel and usability of it is great. So I think I would highly recommend that, and more than Visio, to be honest, because I think, first of all, getting licenses for Visio have become a problem in most of the organizations. So it's easier to get a free trial version of these tools. So so that, and of course, and I think the other thing is a Swagger specification. I have been using Swagger specifications to define service models and all of that for quite some time. And uh, while you might need to learn some basics around Swagger, but once you have learned, it's quite easy, and it's just similar to defining what are the different fields in your service, and what will be the data type. You can add a description, and there are way more that you can do in Swagger specs. But in some of the organizations I've seen, what it does is definitely reduces the development time, because the developers in some of them can readily use a Swagger spec, export the information, you create the XML version of it. So it is really, 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 really useful. And again, from our perspective, we have done the design. We know the information to ensure that everything is in there, and you're not spending another day to review a specification sent by the developer to you to say, can you check all the fields are fine, everything is fine, and all of that. So yeah, these are the tools I would definitely recommend.
And I mean, although you obviously mentioned some fine tools there, I think one of the things that resonates for me, what you're saying, is around that annotation, the labeling as well, and knowing fundamentally that I think the reason you mentioned it was about knowing your audience and knowing what they want to take from the design as well. So I think that's really, really important point. And maybe to that point, people watching this, people going about functional design for the first time, they should definitely, I think, it's always helpful to be guided from some of the textbooks or some of the techniques that are out there. But, knowing who your audience are, knowing that different people will want to get different information from it, and you can use simple things like annotation or even color to help them get what they need from it, I think cannot be overlooked anyway.
Yeah, to add on to that, I just remember, because you talked about the color. So I worked on a project which was mainly to bring the accessibility standard of a website, and I did not know that there was so much research I had to do. And honestly, I was given an Excel with multiple levels of accessibility notes and annotations and functions that had to be put in, and it was very difficult for me to first understand and then go back to that Excel and put the information. And at one point I was like, I cannot do this. I cannot maintain this document. First of all, it does not make sense. I don't know how someone who will have to translate this into a working code can understand this. So I just went back and put the details on the UI itself, that on a button which says submit, we need to add a text so that an accessible user will get a message to say that, are you sure submit the application and all of that. That was much simpler because you can also see that you can visualize that, okay, click on this, I get a text and so on. So that was much simpler rather than trying to put all of that in Excel, scrolling left, right to see all the fields and everything that are all the cells that I'm filling up. So yeah.
That's it. It definitely comes across, Paromita. Every time you mention something, it's obvious that you're concerned with who the reader is of your analysis or who the viewer is, which is always a good thing. So some excellent points. Harry, what would be your view on tools or templates you've used and would recommend?
Yeah, I started my career with one of the clients in Upper Midwest, and they had an in-house quality management system, right? And I'm talking about an established and really mature PMO, right? So when you work for such an established, mature, right, who had all the golden samples and the templates, right, it makes the life of a BA really easy because you have established templates that you can simply just take it and start running, right? And then after a while, I started working for another global supply chain management company. They had no PMO, right? I was the only one who was trying to backfill, right? So when you have this paradigm shift and then start, trying to, create, right, documentation, right? That is when the real challenge and your experience and then, right, looking at other people, right? What makes it more viable, right? What makes it more valuable to the project? So I would say, right, the most useful for the project, right, for the stakeholders as well as for the whole project team is Confluence really helped, right? I'm a big hoarder, right? I gather a lot of documents. I'm sure you all do as well, right? As a BA, you get dumped on, right, as you start a project, or if you're big, in the middle of a project, right? I'm sure you will accumulate tons and tons of, process flows, Word documents, Excels, and so many other things, right? So when you have this wealth of information, right, if no one can access it, it's of no use. So um, building a common Confluence page, or for that matter, right, Confluence is just a tool, right? You can build an HTML page, right, which all the project team members can use, right, which can link out to a SharePoint or link out to key artifacts, right, for the project. Really helps, right, so that everyone is grounded on the same facts, and they all can refer to the same truth, right? We don't want developers going in a different tangent, BA working on his own requirements, testers doing their own test cycles, right? All of that. So that one really helped. And when I was working for one of the financial services company, I had a great project manager and a product manager as well, right? So that person did two roles, right? Product manager as well as a project manager. He utilized Miro boards really, really well. Right? You can create presentations, you can create process flows, you can create notes, right? He used to have one Miro board which was shared with across the project team, and it was our central place to go for requirements, user journeys, everything, right? So those were really powerful tools because you have everything in one place. You can really present to the audience, present to your stakeholders. You have your status there. Man, that was one heck of a document, that I would say. And then obviously, right, our Microsoft products, right, Excel, Word, and PowerPoint, those are really powerful, Excel especially, right, for data management, data mapping, you name it, right, you can do it in Excel. And obviously, Paromita has covered a lot of other grounds, right, like for UI, UX, and all of that. So yeah, I mean, when we start talking about it, right, we will definitely need another session to just talk about the tools and the templates.
That's it. Yeah, there's always interest in these conversations because no one can be expected to call out all the tools, or even in the time that we have to call them all out, all the techniques
Exactly.
matter. So it's always interesting. I think for me, I mean, again, I won't try and add every tool to it. I think Visio I found can be useful because it does allow that annotation that Paramita was talking about. I'm definitely a fan of sort of layering different pieces of information together, so that helps. And I think on the same token, Miro boards allow exactly the same as well. And anything that does that is useful. I think though one other, I wouldn't call it a tool. Maybe think about tools got a capability, but I think any tools that have the capability to take every element that you draw and reflect them as unique data objects is quite important, because then you can start to report off of what you're drawing. You can start to associate the objects you're drawing as part of your functional design, perhaps with requirements or risks or the solution. So I think that has its benefits as well, rather than have to recreate what you've drawn in an Excel or in another tool to recognize their existence. So that's probably all I would add. I guess in the interest of time, I know Harry, you started talking about some best practices a moment ago when we were talking about the last question. But do you have one more tip that you might want to share, as be it a best practice or just useful tip for creating a functional specification that anyone might appreciate?
Well, I think, as I said, right, the best advice and that I got at the very, very early stages of my BA career, right, from my mentor is to keep things simple, right? I think that's the best practice that I take in every day with me, right? And having, don't overcomplicate things, right? There are people, right, who can talk about complicated things, right? Like you talk to technology architect or a full stack developer, they can talk about all the complicated things. So as a BA, right, when you come into a project, or if you're working in a project which is already up and running, keeping things simple, right? That would be my mantra going in, and having, clear like don't create any ambiguity, right? If you bring in a lot of jargon and all of that, right? Of course, you may look fancy and people may look you up, right, for certain things, but you may lose some of the business users and SMEs, right? Because they may think, they are coming into a foreign place, right? So having that, and then one other thing that I have noticed of late, right, as the organizations mature and going into this space, right, some of these, quote unquote, animals come in, right, the hippos, right, and several other, right, highest paid person's opinion, right. Some of these people, right, when you have in the team, right, they may have a strong opinion. So when you have people who come with strong opinions or really aggressive tone and voice, you may kind of go on a back foot and you may start just taking notes and become a note taker. I would say, right, don't take that personal or don't take it in a defensive way. Give them the respect and the admiration that they deserve and expect. And once you are done with that particular phase of interaction with them, right, go back to the basics and start building the artifacts that you're working on. I think that will solve some of those intricacies. And you don't want to burn any bridges, right, with those people and stakeholders. So it's just a phase in the project, right? We'll definitely have time when we can clear out all those ambiguities and clear out the pathways. So those are some of the things that I would definitely give as best practices.
That's fair enough. And I think keeping it simple and actually drawing and putting things on paper is a good way to get those hippos, as you put it, or difficult stakeholders as well, to just give them something that they could see and they can talk about and give some actual feedback for, rather than it be emotional, as it were. Paromita, what will be your view on have you got any tips you want to share for us beyond those you already shared?
Yeah, I think whether you're a functional architect or a BA who is doing that role to, formulate the functional design, don't take the whole responsibility on yourself that you have to do it and then complete the whole functional design and then present it to everyone. It should be a collaborative approach. I would play the role of someone who's accountable and responsible to get the designs, but in collaboration with multiple teams that we have talked about, and to get those designs continuously reviewed regularly reviewed rather than leaving it till the end, because I have done that mistake that, initially the thinking, oh, this is my responsibility, I have to finish this, took 3-4 weeks to finish the designs, and went back and said, no, this cannot be the database design, because we need one single field for name. We cannot break it up into first name, last name, this, because of these constraints and all of that. So, and then I had to again redo the whole thing. But probably if I would have gone back to the right team and people at the right time to just ensure that, I'm collaborating properly, I wouldn't have ended up with that trouble. So I would always say that have that collaboration going rather than keeping it till the end. And not to make assumptions while coming up with design. If something is not clear, go back to users or go back to the right person to get the answer before implementing or before adding something to the functional design. Because many a times, of course, the functional requirements, some of them are at very high level, and we tend to understand it and break it down based on our understanding and doing some market research and thinking, okay, this is what I have seen in this app, that app, this works really well. But that might not be best suited for what we are trying to do or what the product manager or the sponsor wants to do. So it's better that do not base your functional design on assumption. It should be based on facts. So if there are assumptions, get them validated and get the answer before you move on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you have both actually made throughout, many of the things you said, whilst are very appropriate for functional design, they're also more widely appropriate for business analysis as well. So I guess don't be afraid to apply that same mentality around not making assumptions to the functional design in the same way you wouldn't with the requirements. And I think just building on the excellent points you've made, I think the only tip that I would offer at this point, I'm sure we could spend a lot more time on it, is really for BAs that are either responsible for the functional design or actually just doing functional analysis on a component. Just ask people who've already been around, where is the functional design? Where was the last version of the functional design?
Yeah.
Does one exist? Does it exist in other areas? And having that view of what good looks like or what something looks like is an opportunity for you to maybe understand the role you're playing in this situation, or at least can inform the way you put functional design together for this current situation you find yourself in. So that's probably the only point I would add. It's one of those conversations, definitely interesting. I know that for sure. Been doing functional design a lot over the years, and it really does give you that ability to start painting that picture and sharing that transparency around what the solution's going to have, but founded in realism, which is really the requirements and the stakeholders that you've interacted with. So all that's probably left really is just to thank you both for your time. Thank you for sharing your insights and your points of view and your tips, last of all, as well. So I'll look forward to speaking to you again and hearing more from you in the wider BA community. But until that point, thank you again.
Thanks, John. Thanks. Nice to meet you, Harry.
Thank you.